Today I'm going to show you two big changes that I made to absolutely smash my sourdough baking cost to pieces. I managed to reduce my flour costs by over 3 times and cut my electrical costs in half. Now it definitely wasn't all plain sailing, and at the end of the video I'm going to show you one of my failures or disasters that kind of encompassed all of the problems that I faced, and I'll explain how I overcame them. Now I should mention that this isn't really a method that I use on a daily basis, and that's purely because I'm designing and I'm baking different recipes for this YouTube channel and for the website. But if you're looking to cut costs, this is going to give you two cracking ideas to begin with. So let's have a look at the flour element first. Now it's the main ingredient of sourdough, but it can cost a pretty penny, depending on the type that you're buying. Now I've been using Robin Hood all-purpose flour as my everyday flour now for quite a few years. It's got a protein content of 13.2 and it's pretty much bulletproof for baking sourdough. It's safe. But that comes at a price, and in my local supermarket I pay €4.15 per kilo for it. Now if I make my standard 800 gram dough at 70% hydration, I'm going to use 465 grams of flour, which works out to €1.93 per loaf. Now in all honesty, I don't think that's too bad, but if you're on a budget, we can do better. I've been searching for local Greek flour now for some time, and some of you suggested that I try Cooler as it's popular with some bakeries. And if you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen my week of testing this flour. So Cooler is a soft Greek flour with just over 10% protein, and it costs just €1.28 a kilo. That saves me €2.87 a kilo compared to my Robin Hood flour. So using the same recipe, 800 gram dough at 70% hydration, the Cooler costs just 60 cents. That's over 3 times cheaper. Now I should note that you don't need to use a soft flour. It just so happened that this flour was low in protein, but I chose it because it was a good quality flour. But if you can find a bread flour that costs less, that's going to be an obvious way to go. Now before we look at the problems I faced with using a soft flour, let's look at the baking setup. Now I think everybody is getting a little bit nervous about the rising cost of energy at the moment, and this is definitely one area where we can save some money. Now generally I use my stone for baking sourdough. The stone takes an hour to preheat though to reach 220 degrees Celsius, and including the baking time, which is a total of 40 minutes, that's an hour and 40 minutes that my oven is burning electricity. So I decided to begin the baking process from a cold start, a cold oven. So I swapped out the stone for a standard oven tray, which I flipped upside down. I place a non-stick mat on the top so that the dough doesn't stick. I spray the inside of a lightweight casserole pot with water, and then after I've scored the dough and slid it onto the oven shelf, I cover it with the pan. I set my oven to conventional bake mode, that's top and bottom heat only, and the temperature to 220 degrees Celsius. Now I just set my timer for 30 minutes. After that 30 minutes, I remove the pot and then I leave the sourdough to bake for another 20 minutes. That's that. That is the baking part done. Now you don't need to use a pot to cover the dough. You could slide an inverted tray onto the top rack of the oven, as I do in my baguette or sandwich loaf videos. You can mist the inside of the oven with water, or you could use a tray of water placed on the bottom of the oven to create steam. You know, there are many different possibilities, but for me, the inverted lightweight pan is my absolute favourite, and I get the best results. Now this method of baking sourdough takes 50 minutes. That means that my oven is burning 50% of the time that it was before when I was trying to preheat my baking stone. Now, you know, sourdough is never plain sailing, and reducing my cost this drastically definitely came with a few problems. This was one of my first bakes using the cold oven method combined with a soft flour. And when I first assessed it, I wasn't kind of quite sure what to adjust, and it took several tweaks to get this right. And these are the changes that I made over 3 baking sessions. First, I reduced the amount of water I used to 65% hydration from 70. The low protein flour was creating a really soft dough, and I figured it was spreading out on the oven tray before it got hot enough to start increasing in volume. I also figured that the softer dough couldn't handle such a long fermentation time, so I reduced the bulk fermentation and the proving time in the basket. But I think it's also worth mentioning that working with a softer flour, it's tricky. It produces a softer dough and it takes practice to handle it well. But I believe that by stepping out of our comfort zones and challenging our skills, we definitely improve as home bakers. But if you want to see a dedicated video showing the full process of using a soft all-purpose flour to bake sourdough, let me know in the comments. Now originally I only left the dough covered with a casserole pan for 20 minutes when baking, but extending it to 30 minutes and spraying the inside of it with water maximised the increase in volume. And that's how I pulled everything together to get a loaf like this, slash my electricity costs and reduce my flour costs by over 3 times. Now, it may not spring straight to mind, but reducing your wastage, what you chuck in the bin, is going to reduce your overall cost too. So be sure to read my blog on how to store sourdough and how to use it to minimise wastage and above all, keep things interesting. All of the resources mentioned in this video will be linked in the video description. And remember, cutting down on your sourdough starter wastage will reduce your cost too. So dive straight into this video to see how the scrapings method can reduce your wastage and save you money. A huge thank you for watching. See you again very soon. Stay tuned.